Hey, what's already? Welcome back to News Dose, and this past weekend was a bit of a mixed bag. On one hand, we may potentially get an Xbox/Nintendo game revival that could wind up being one of the most celebrated announcements of all time. Now, this being a Microsoft-owned IP, you never completely know about them. Plans seemingly change by the day, but this is still potentially very exciting, so we're going to get into that, as well as a cancellation rumor, though not 100% convinced of this one just yet, so I'm going to go ahead and try to talk you fans down that are probably devastated by the recent news. First, though, I do want to thank my supporters on Patreon and on YouTube memberships. Thank you just so much for what you do, and you will receive this video through early access. Let's go and get right into things, though, starting off with the Nintendo Switch 2 and the power that is packing behind its 7.9-inch display. This has been one of the most discussed topics since its reveal, and let me tell you, it's pretty impressive for a handheld device, because check this out. Virtua Studios, which, they know what they're talking about, claimed that any game that ships on the Xbox Series S with 60 frames per second should easily be ported over to the Switch 2. Their reasoning for this is that despite the Switch 2's slightly lesser GPU, it makes up the difference with its DLSS technology, making it comparable to the Xbox Series S. Now, in terms of its CPU, on the other hand, this is where the Series S shines, but they said the Switch 2 is closer to the PlayStation 4 in this respect, having a CPU just a bit more powerful than the PlayStation 4's. Since most games tend to be more GPU-bound than CPU-bound, when well optimized, the impact of this difference largely depends on the specific game and its target frame rate. Any game shipping at 60 FPS on the Series S should easily port to the Switch 2. Likewise, a 30 FPS Series S game that's GPU-bound should also port well. Games with complex physics, animations, or other CPU-intensive elements might incur additional challenges in reaching 30 or 60 FPS or require extra optimization during porting. So, in other words, the Switch 2 is somewhere right between the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox Series S, which that's actually a fairly good place to be, considering we're talking about a handheld hybrid console. You do have to kind of keep things into perspective, and I think a lot of people tend to forget just how capable the PlayStation 4 was and still is even to this day. It's still getting new games like God of War Ragnarok as one such example. So the way I would view this particular statement is that, much like the PlayStation 4, the Switch 2 is probably capable of running a lot of these newer, bigger AAA games that we're seeing. But, yes, they might have to sacrifice frame rate for certain games. So Cyberpunk, as a benchmark, instead of 60 FPS, it instead runs at 40 or 30 frames per second. So yeah, I think we're going to see a lot more AAA games for the Switch 2 that you might not otherwise expect from previous Nintendo generations. And that is a big milestone for Nintendo and for their fans. Sure, you can get the better performing counterpart on the Xbox Series or the PlayStation 5, but if you prefer to play on a handheld or a Nintendo console, then the Switch 2, it's going to hold its own. Now, speaking of big AAA games that can run on the Switch 2, we also got some reviews for Tony Hawk 3+4. It will be available on July 11th, and the good news here is that, as expected, seems to be a good collection of remakes / reimaginings. More on that in a second, but currently has an 83 overall score on Metacritic without a single review below an 80. Though, to be completely fair here, this is only with 11 total reviews. So that score could still drastically change here in the coming days as more reviews roll in, but for now, these reviews indicate that the wait has been well worth it. Now, the one slight complaint that I've heard is that for purists, if you want this game to be exactly the same as the originals, well, it seems like Iron Galaxy, being the new developer, took the liberty of making some slight changes. That's why they feel like they're somewhere in between remakes and reimaginings. Either which way, though, it sounds like they're still an absolute blast to play, even decades after their original release, which, hey, I'd say that says a lot. I, for one, want to jump into Tony Hawk 3 specifically. That's the entry that I personally have the most memories with. I played it a ton on the GameCube back in the day, so, when I get the chance, I'm pretty excited to jump in and see if that nostalgia returns. Now, let's go talk about some Xbox games. There's been a lot of conversation about last week's layoffs and cancellations, and I think rightfully so. To me, it kind of comes off as a sign of Microsoft's looming presence over Team Xbox. The idea that it's now Microsoft Gaming and not necessarily Team Xbox. But we're not going to get into all of that today. That's for a different topic. But one game that we heard about last week was a new first-person shooter from Romero Games, aka the studio led by the original Doom creator. So this was some kind of third-party partnership with Xbox, but Microsoft pulled their funding, which caused some rumors online that it was canceled and that the studio was going to shut down. However, Romero Games has since given us an update, and we can read what they said here. They said, "We want to address recent reports regarding the status of Romero Games. These reports have contained inaccuracies, and we feel it's important to set the record straight. The funding for our project was pulled, and our game was canceled. Due to confidentiality agreements, we cannot disclose the publisher's identity, though some may infer it from public information. Continuing on, as a result, we now have to reassess the entire staffing of our studio. Romero Games is not closed, and we are doing everything in our power to ensure that it does not come to that. Any suggestion otherwise is factually incorrect. Indeed, we were in the studio today to discuss next steps with the team. We've been contacted by several publishers interested in helping us bring the game across the finish line, and we're currently evaluating those opportunities." So the good news here is that they've yet to shut down, and the even better news is that they're already getting calls from other publishers. Now, who those publishers are remains to be seen. It could be EA, it could be PlayStation, it could be Embracer Group, Tencent, or who really knows. It's hard to say as of right now, but hopefully somebody signs them up. John Romero is a legend within the industry, and I'm sure a lot of people would like to see his next project come to light. They just need a better partner that's more committed to seeing whatever this game is to the end. Okay, now continuing on here, I do understand that it might be a little bit tough to get super excited about future Xbox games currently, just because that guarantee feels far out with recent news. But even still, there might actually be some potentially good news for a game revival that I've been asking for years. And I know a lot of people have been begging, and I mean just begging, for this to become a reality. Yes, we're once again talking about Banjo-Kazooie. Now, this comes from Andy Robinson over on the Video Game Chronicles, which has a great track record, and I also know that he has sources within Rare. So this is actually really interesting, and he said the talk for ages was that, there's always outside interest in Banjo, but they're not interested. I mean, Greg Mells, the Banjo-Kazooie creator, is someone who doesn't look back. Notoriously, he said this on the record, that he likes to do new stuff. The attitude from the studio leadership was always, no, we're going to do the new thing. I heard more recently that pitches are being listened to. I heard constantly the name that comes up is Toys for Bob, who really want to do one. Funny enough, I heard Moon Studios as well was another one who's really interested. And that's one of the things that makes this particular rumor just so fascinating, because not only does this come from a pretty reliable source, but also both of those studios are outstanding at what they do, and they both also have a relationship with Xbox. Toys for Bob is currently working with Xbox on a brand new game, though I actually suspect that is the next Spyro. I don't believe that it's Banjo, but even if it's not, that doesn't mean that they can't pitch a new Banjo game for their next project after whatever they're working on, which again is probably Spyro. Now, as for Moon Studios, they of course grew under Xbox with the Ori franchise. Now, they're currently working on No Rest for the Wicked, and that's their number one priority for the time being. They've mentioned that several times, but I do know for a fact that the CEO wants to make a new Banjo-Kazooie game. He's said as much on social media. And now from what Andy Robinson has heard, it seems like that's not just public interest. It sounds like he may have actually pitched a Banjo project to Rare and to Xbox. Now, this also kind of aligns with what Phil Spencer alluded to last year when he said that he's aware of Banjo-Kazooie fans and that he hasn't forgotten about us. So I think at the very least, based on all of the information that we currently have, it does make sense that they're at least listening to pitches. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that anything will be greenlit. We still need to temper our expectations, especially given everything that's happened this past week. But this is a positive sign, if anything else. And I'll also say this much. I think now more than ever, a new Banjo-Kazooie game makes more sense than ever before. And the reason for that is because of Xbox's new multi-platform plans. A new Banjo-Kazooie game would be huge on the Nintendo Switch 2. I think it could actually sell multiple million units on the Switch 2 alone. It could still have success on PC and Xbox, Game Pass, wherever they want to release it, but I think that it would have a lot of success on a Nintendo console. So I think that could be a major reason to believe that a Banjo game could get the green light. But let me ask you, which studio would you prefer? Moon Studios or Toys for Bob? I think either which way, though, you really can't go wrong. Now, one more thing before we go, because unfortunately, there is a rumor that the Final Fantasy IX remake has been canceled. And I know right away, there's going to be comments about how you can't cancel a game that was never announced. I always get comments like that, but that's really not how this type of stuff works. In reality, most canceled games are games that were never officially revealed. And we do have a lot of information that essentially confirms the existence of Final Fantasy IX Remake. It was a part of the infamous NVIDIA leak, and it also leaked out on the Epic Game Store, if I'm remembering correctly. So it leaked on 2 different databases, and I don't think that that's just some kind of coincidence. What I believe is that they were originally planning to announce it as a part of the Final Fantasy IX 25th anniversary that they're currently celebrating. However, things may have since changed. According to Nate the Hate, it might be running into bigger problems than just that. He mentioned, as of last check, it remains in development, to my knowledge, but I need to do a fresh check and see what a more current status is, as I did hear a month or so ago that it was in trouble and possibly canceled. I only had one source on the cancellation possibility and need to verify the info further. So now fans, which were seemingly 100% positive that we were going to get an official announcement, maybe possibly even in the coming weeks, are now devastated. They are freaking out about this rumor, but that's where I want to go ahead and say let's just kind of keep calm, because Nate clearly said that he needs more verification. He even clarified on Twitter that he doesn't have confirmation that Final Fantasy IX has been canceled at present. Now, I will point out, though, that there was a rumor from last year that Square Enix wasn't satisfied with the Final Fantasy IX remake, which at the time was being outsourced. And so, Square shifted its development. So, that could potentially align with what Nate heard here. Maybe, and this is speculation on my part, but maybe Final Fantasy IX has moved to an internal Square Enix team, similar to what happened with the development for Final Fantasy VII Remake. And if that's what happened, then at the very least, we could possibly be talking about a delay. So they may have originally planned for a 25th anniversary launch. I do believe that that was their original plans, but that may no longer be the case. I, however, just have a hard time believing, though, that they could completely mess up a Final Fantasy IX remake. This doesn't seem like it would be a hard project to pull off, so I'm definitely not convinced that it's been canceled. Maybe it's been altered, or maybe it's been delayed, but either way, hopefully we'll get an update here in the coming days. Anyways, though, that's going to be for this episode, but until next time, make sure to subscribe, ring that bell, and peace out.